The entire diner went silent the moment the police officer pointed at the door and told her to get out, not because she was causing trouble, not because she'd raised her voice or made a scene. She was sitting quietly in a corner booth, a half-eaten plate of eggs in front of her, a black Belgian Malinois lying still at her feet. She hadn't bothered anyone. She hadn't even asked for a refill. But the manager was already red-faced and certain, and the officer had his hand out like she was something to be removed, and every single person in that diner was watching, and not one of them said a word. What none of them knew was that the dog had already found something that, in less than 4 minutes, would change everything. If this story already has your pulse running, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. The morning had started quietly, the way most of Maya Holt's mornings did after a double shift. She'd been on her feet for 22 hours straight at Carver Ridge Medical Center, a mid-sized hospital on the outskirts of Dunmore, Tennessee, running on 3 granola bars and the kind of grim determination that doesn't come from ambition so much as obligation. She was a trauma nurse, charge level, which meant that when the overnight got bad, and last night had gotten bad, she was the one holding the line. 2 motor vehicle accidents, 1 pediatric respiratory emergency, a chest wound that shouldn't have survived transport but somehow did. By the time she clocked out at 5:47 a.m., her sneakers had blood on them, and her ponytail had surrendered somewhere around hour 14. The drive home to Mill Haven was 40 minutes on a good stretch of highway, and Maya wasn't going to make it without coffee and something that wasn't from a vending machine. She pulled off Route 9 at a place called Kettner's, a diner that had probably been there since before she was born. The sign out front had a missing letter, Kettner Diner, the apostrophe ghost of a letter long gone, and the parking lot held 6 trucks, a minivan, and a hand-painted chalkboard advertising the Tuesday special, biscuits and sausage gravy, $4. She almost drove past it. She stopped because Raven shifted in the back seat, sat up, and looked at her the way the dog always looked at her when Maya was about to make a bad decision. "Fine," Maya said. "We'll stop." Raven was a Belgian Malinois, 7 years old, retired from military working dog service, with the 75th Ranger Support Battalion after a deployment injury left her with a permanent limp in her left rear leg. She wasn't Maya's dog in the way people imagined. She wasn't a pet who'd been adopted out of sentiment. She was a working animal who had been medically retired, and Maya had gone through the formal process of adopting her through the military working dog program. There was paperwork. There were certifications. There was a laminated card in Maya's wallet with Raven's service history, her handler clearances, and her public access documentation. Maya kept it close because people always had questions. She clipped Raven's vest on, the official one, dark gray with patches that said Military Working Dog in block letters. And the two of them walked across the gravel lot toward Kettner's front door. The air smelled like dew and diesel and frying bacon. Maya held the door. Raven walked through first the way she always did, and they found a booth near the back window, away from the cluster of truckers near the counter. A waitress came by almost immediately, young, friendly, and unbothered by the dog. She had a coffee pot in one hand and a practiced smile. "What can I get you, hun?" "Coffee, black, eggs scrambled, wheat toast, and whatever comes with it." Maya set her bag down under the table. "Thank you." "Sure thing." The waitress glanced down at Raven, who was already lying flat under the table, chin on her front paws. "She's beautiful." "She is," Maya agreed. "She knows it too." The waitress laughed and moved off. Maya wrapped both hands around the coffee mug the moment it arrived and let her eyes close for just a second. Not sleep, just stillness. The diner noise was the right kind of background. Low conversation, silverware on ceramic, the hiss of the grill. Familiar. Manageable. She didn't notice the man at the host stand until he was already moving toward her. He was in his mid-50s, heavy-set, with the kind of face that had probably been reasonable once, but had settled over time into a permanent expression of mild disapproval. He wore a collared shirt with Kettner's stitched over the breast pocket, which meant he was either the manager or the owner, and he walked like someone who had decided something before he arrived. "Excuse me." He stopped at the edge of her booth. His eyes went to Raven. "Ma'am, you can't have a dog in here." Maya looked up. She set her coffee down. "She's a certified military working dog. She's got public access rights under federal service animal guidelines. The man, his name tag said Darren, crossed his arms. I don't care what kind of dog it is. I have a policy. No animals on the premises. That policy doesn't apply to service animals. Maya's voice was even. She wasn't raising it. She was too tired to raise it. Military working dogs retain service status after retirement. I can show you her documentation. I don't need documentation. I need you to take the dog outside. Several people at nearby tables had turned to look. A man in a John Deere cap. An older woman mid-bite. A family of 4 with 2 kids who were now openly staring. Maya could feel it. The particular weight of a public audience. Everyone waiting to see what happened next. She reached into her bag and pulled out the laminated card, setting it flat on the table so Darren could read it without her having to hand it over. He looked at it for about 2 seconds, which wasn't enough time to actually read anything. This doesn't change my policy, he said. Your policy is in conflict with federal law. His face changed slightly, not backing down, just adjusting the angle. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Maya looked at him for a long moment. There was something particular about this kind of confrontation, the kind where someone has decided to use their authority as a door instead of a tool, where reason isn't going to move them because they stopped listening 3 sentences ago. She'd met this person in hospitals, in briefings, in combat zones. The face was always slightly different. The posture was always the same. She didn't get up. I'm in the middle of breakfast. I'll refund your order. I don't want a refund. Darren's jaw tightened. Then I'm going to call the police. Okay, Maya said, and picked up her coffee. What? Deputy First Class Trevor Mullen arrived in 9 minutes, which was faster than Maya expected for a Tuesday morning. He was younger than she'd imagined from his voice on the radio. She'd overheard Darren making the call on. Mid-30s, sandy-haired, with the particular set of the shoulders that came from years of walking into situations where everyone wanted you to immediately take their side. He came through the door, assessed the room in about 4 seconds, and walked to Maya's booth. Morning, ma'am. He looked at the dog. I'm going to need you to step outside with me. Maya set down her fork. Her eggs were only half finished. I haven't done anything wrong, deputy. I understand that. I'd still like to talk to you outside. We can talk here. Trevor's expression didn't shift. He was doing the thing, the careful, neutral voice that was professionally non-escalatory, but still unambiguous. Ma'am, there's been a complaint. I know. I was here for it. Maya folded her hands on the table. His complaint doesn't make me legally required to leave. This dog is a certified military working dog with public access rights. I've offered documentation. He declined to read it. Darren, who had been standing a few feet back like he was waiting for his prize, stepped forward. I want her removed. This is my establishment. Trevor held up one hand toward Darren, patience, and looked back at Maya. Can I see the documentation? Yes. Maya slid the laminated card across the table. Trevor looked at it. Actually looked at it, which was more than Darren had done. His eyes moved across the text, and something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, just a small recalibration. He looked at the name on the card, then at Maya. This says you were a handler with the 75th Ranger Support Battalion? No, Maya said. I was a combat medic attached to 75th Ranger units. Raven's previous handler was my unit partner. When he was killed in action, I completed the adoption process. She paused. She was already assigned to me. It was a formality. Trevor said nothing for a moment. The diner had gotten quiet in the particular way diners get when something worth paying attention to is happening 3 booths away. I'm still going to need to see your ID, ma'am. Maya reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and laid her driver's license on the table. She also, without comment, placed a second card next to it, a smaller one, military issued, with her photograph and service classification information. Trevor picked it up, read it. He went still, not alarmed, but still in the way people get when a situation has turned out to be very different from what they walked into. He looked at the card, then at Maya, and then he did a thing that most people in authority don't do when they've been wrong about something. He cleared his throat and actually recalibrated. Ms. Holt, he said, how long have you been out? 3 years? You serving now? Trauma nurse. Carver Ridge Medical. He nodded slowly, set the card down, looked at Darren, who was still standing there with his arms crossed, waiting for the resolution he'd already decided on. "Sir," Trevor said, turning to him, "her documentation is legitimate. Under Tennessee state law and federal guidelines for retired military working animals, she has the right to be here." Darren's face did something complicated. "I don't care about guidelines. This is my diner. With respect, sir, your personal policy doesn't supersede federal accommodation requirements." "Then I'll take it up with whoever I have to take it up with." Darren pointed at Maya. "But right now, I want her out." Trevor looked at Maya. Something apologetic had entered the edges of his expression, not quite remorse, but the beginning of it. "Ms. Holt, I'm sorry about this. Technically, I can't compel you to leave if you haven't violated any law, but I'd ask you to consider—" "She's reacting," Maya said. Both men stopped. Maya wasn't looking at either of them. She was looking at Raven. The dog had gone still in a way that had nothing to do with obedience training. Her head was up. Both ears were forward and locked. Her nostrils were moving in the rapid, shallow flutter that Maya had seen hundreds of times in the field, on airstrips, in checkpoint buildings, in blown-out market corridors. The scent-mapping behavior that meant Raven had found something in the air and was sorting through it. Maya's hand went to the edge of the table. "When did that start?" She was talking to herself. Raven's body stayed perfectly still except for her nose. Then, slowly, she stood. There is a particular kind of attention that a former combat medic carries into civilian life. Not paranoia, but an elevated readiness, a second-layer awareness that never fully switches off. Maya had learned in her years of training that the human brain, even under exhaustion, even under the particular fog of a 22-hour shift and a bad-faith confrontation with a diner manager, will sometimes recognize danger before the conscious mind can name it. She'd learned to trust that recognition. She was already getting up from the booth when Raven moved. The dog didn't lunge. She didn't bark. She walked in the way she'd been trained to walk when she'd found something and hadn't been given the command to indicate yet. Low, controlled, each step deliberate, nose tracking something that existed below the level of human perception. She moved toward the back of the diner, toward the corridor that led to the restrooms and the kitchen service door, and Maya followed. "Hey!" Darren's voice from behind her. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Maya kept moving. "I'm talking to you." "Be quiet," Maya said, and her voice had changed in a way she didn't consciously decide on. It was the command voice, the one that came from years of field operations where being ignored got people killed. It wasn't loud. It was precise. Darren stopped talking. Raven reached the end of the main dining room and turned left, into the narrow service corridor. The walls here were unpainted concrete block, industrial, smelling of bleach and old grease. A mop bucket, a shelf of restaurant supply cans, the emergency exit at the far end with a push bar and a laminated evacuation map, and a large wheeled trash container, commercial grade, the kind restaurants used for bulk waste disposal, shoved against the wall next to the exit, with a folded piece of cardboard wedged under the lid. Raven stopped in front of it, sat down. Maya felt her chest go very cold. The sit was the trained indication behavior. Raven had been trained to indicate, not to paw, not to bark, not to scratch, but to sit. Clean, controlled, unambiguous. When a military working dog trained in explosive detection sites, it means exactly one thing. Trevor had followed them. He was standing at the mouth of the corridor, one hand on his belt, reading the scene. "Ms. Holt," he said carefully. "What is she doing?" Maya turned to look at him. "She's indicating." A beat. Indicating. Explosive detection. She's indicating a find. Maya's voice was completely level. "You need to call your EOD unit right now. You need to clear this building." Trevor went very still. He looked at the trash container, then at the dog, then at Maya. His hand moved to his radio. Darren had followed them all the way into the corridor, apparently unable to stop himself, and he let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. "Oh, come on, she's a retired dog. She probably smells garbage." "She doesn't false indicate," Maya said. She didn't look at him when she said it. In 6 years of active service, she never false indicated once. Not on an airstrip in Helmand, not in a market sweep in Inawa province, not in a vehicle checkpoint in the Korengal. Never. Trevor was already talking into his radio, low and controlled, giving the location and the nature of the call. His voice didn't shake, which Maya noted and respected. She put her hand on Raven's collar, not to pull her away. "Not yet." just to ground them both. The dog leaned slightly into her palm, a familiar weight, steady. "How long does she hold the indication?" Trevor asked, radio still in hand. "Until I release her or someone takes her out." Maya looked at the trash container. It was a standard commercial bin, dark green, the lid not quite flush against the rim, slightly off, the way a lid gets when something inside has been arranged rather than dumped. "We need everyone out of the main dining room, now, calmly." "I'm not evacuating my diner over a dog sitting next to the trash," Darren said. Maya turned and looked at him fully for the first time since they'd moved into the corridor. She was 5'6", and she'd been awake for 23 hours, and she was still in her nursing scrubs with a coffee stain on the left cuff, and Darren outweighed her by 80 pounds, and had 20 years on her and owned the building they were standing in. None of that was relevant. "If I'm wrong," she said, "you can throw us both out personally, and I will never set foot in this diner again, and you can tell that story for the rest of your life." She held his gaze. "But if I'm right, and you keep those people sitting in there, that's on you, not me. You." Darren opened his mouth, closed it. Trevor was already moving back toward the dining room. Thus, he handled the evacuation better than Maya expected. Calm, no panic framing, just a firm request for all customers to please take their belongings and exit through the front. Something about a possible gas concern. Nothing to worry about. Please move quickly. The note in his voice that said "this is real" was subtle enough that no one ran, but it was there, and people moved. Maya stayed in the corridor with Raven. Not because she needed to. EOD would want the area clear, she knew that. But she also couldn't make herself step back from Raven while the dog was still working, still sitting with every bit of her focus locked on that green bin, ears fully forward, every muscle in her compact body aimed at the same point. "Good girl," Maya said quietly. "Hold." Raven held. The diner emptied in under 3 minutes. Maya could hear it. The shuffle of feet, the scrape of chairs, Darren's voice somewhere in the front saying something she couldn't make out. Then Trevor came back. "I've got EOD rolling from Fort Driscoll, 18 minutes out." "Okay. You need to come out front." "In a second." "Ms. Holt, I know." She looked at the bin one more time, at the gap in the lid, as the way the cardboard wedge was slightly too neatly placed for something accidental. She did good work. I want her to know I saw it." Trevor didn't say anything to that. Maya crouched down so she was level with Raven's head. The dog didn't take her eyes off the bin. Her breathing was slow, measured, completely under control. A 7-year-old working animal who had been trained and retrained and deployed and retired and was still, at the most fundamental level, exactly what she'd been built to be. "You did good, girl," Maya said. Her hand went to the side of Raven's face. "You did real good." Then she stood up, clipped the leash, and walked her out of the building. The parking lot of Kettner's Diner on Route 9 became a very different place in the next 15 minutes. 2 more sheriff's vehicles. A fire department hazmat unit that had been pre-staged 3 miles away for a different call and got redirected. A Tennessee State Police cruiser with 2 troopers who spoke to Trevor in low voices next to his car. And then, 17 minutes after the initial call, 1 minute ahead of estimate, a gray military vehicle with government plates and a Driscoll explosive ordnance sticker on the bumper, and 3 people in tactical gear who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who did this for a living. Darren was standing by the side of the building with a woman Maya assumed was his wife or a co-owner based on the way he kept talking to her and the way she kept not responding. His face had gone through several colors in the past 20 minutes. He was currently on a kind of muted ash. Maya sat on the tailgate of her truck with Raven's head in her lap, running her fingers through the dog's fur. Raven had released the indication the moment they cleared the building, and now she was in the particular state that working dogs sometimes enter after a high-intensity task. Alert but loose, the pressure gone out of her body, leaning into Maya's hand. Trevor came and stood nearby, not close, just nearby. After a long minute, he said, "How long were you in?" 8 years. Combat medic the whole time. Last 4 years were attachment to special operations units. Before that, field medicine with a regular infantry battalion. He stopped. "That's a long time." "It's about average." Maya kept her eyes on the building. The EOD team had been inside for 11 minutes. You handled the evacuation well, kept it calm. Trevor looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. A little older, a little less certain. I didn't handle you well. Maya was quiet for a moment. No, you didn't. The documentation was clear. I should have. You did eventually, she said. People get there at different speeds. He accepted that without comment, which she appreciated. She'd had enough conversations where the apology became its own kind of performance, the person apologizing needing something back from you for doing it. The radio on Trevor's belt clicked. He listened. His face changed. He turned to Maya. They found it, he said. It's real. He paused. Active. Maya nodded slowly. Her hand kept moving through Raven's fur. The dog's eyes were half closed. How many people were in there? Maya asked. 31, including staff. She looked at the diner. The Kettner sign with its missing letter. The Tuesday special chalkboard, still out front, undisturbed. $4 for biscuits and gravy. 31 people who had walked in for breakfast. She thought about Darren's face when he'd crossed his arms and said, I don't care about guidelines. She thought about Trevor's hand extended toward the door. She thought about what she'd heard one of the truckers near the counter say when she first sat down. Something about weather, something ordinary. Then she thought about what the EOD team was doing inside, and what would have happened if she'd done what she almost did, gotten up and left without making a scene, which was what every instinct born from civilian politeness had told her to do when she'd first seen Darren walking toward her table. She'd been awake 23 hours. She'd been dismissed, condescended to, and almost physically removed, and she'd still caught it. Because Raven had caught it, and Maya had trusted her. Not because she was a dog, but because she was right. And Maya had learned a long time ago in a lot of very unforgiving places that the only thing that costs more than trusting the right signal is ignoring it. What kind of device? She asked. Trevor hesitated. I'm cleared for that conversation, Deputy. He looked at her ID card again, which she'd kept out. His eyes moved over the classification lines. He nodded slowly. Pipe construction, timed. They're saying it was set. He lowered his voice. 45 minutes, maybe. Could be less. Maya looked at her watch. They'd been in the diner for 31 minutes before Raven indicated. She didn't say that out loud. She didn't need to. Trevor was doing the same math and arriving at the same place. The particular quiet devastation of a near miss, when you understand not just what happened, but exactly how thin the margin was. She just kept her hand on Raven's back, steady and slow, and watched the parking lot fill with people who were trying to understand what kind of morning this had turned out to be. Darren had moved closer. She could see him from the corner of her eye, standing about 20 feet away, not looking at her directly. His wife or co-owner had her phone out, probably calling someone. His arms were no longer crossed. A state trooper walked over to him and began asking questions. Darren answered, and whatever he said made the trooper write something down and then ask a follow-up, and then another, and Darren's expression shifted into something that had stopped being embarrassed and started being something more serious. The EOD team lead came out of the building. He walked directly to Trevor, pulled his face shield up, and said something. Trevor listened, nodded, looked at Maya. He walked over. They want to talk to you, he said. EOD lead wants your assessment of the entry timing, your military background. I understand. She looked at Raven. Stay. The dog settled flat. Maya walked across the gravel lot toward the EOD team lead, who was mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the careful, unhurried manner of someone who had spent years in close proximity to things that could end him. He held out his hand. Staff Sergeant Holt? It's just Maya now, she said, and shook it. Ryan Pollard, EOD team lead, Fort Driscoll. He glanced back at the building, then at her. Your dog found it? She did. What was the indication behavior? Clean sit, no secondary. She went straight to the container, no circling, no uncertainty. She'd found something clean. Pollard nodded. It was in the bottom of the bin under 2 inches of food waste, professionally concealed, not amateur construction. He looked at her. If you'd left when they asked you to, I know. I mean, the timing was, I know, she said. How much of the device can you tell me? He considered, looked at her clearance card, which Trevor had passed over. Enough to say we're not dealing with opportunistic. Someone planned this. The parking lot noise fell away a little around that sentence. Not literally. The sirens were still going. Someone was on a bullhorn somewhere. A news van had appeared at the edge of the lot. But in Maya's head, it went briefly quiet. Planned. Not random. Not some unstable individual with a bad idea and a hardware store receipt. Planned, which meant a target, which meant someone had chosen Kettner's Diner on a Tuesday morning on Route 9 and decided that the people eating breakfast there were the point. She looked at the building, at the sign, at the chalkboard. 31 people. Who had access to that corridor, she asked. That's what we're figuring out. Pollard's jaw tightened slightly. Security footage is being pulled now. The service entrance off the alley. The lock was bypassed. Not broken, bypassed. He paused. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, and they knew the building. Maya stood very still. Somewhere behind her, she heard Darren's voice rising slightly, the trooper's voice staying flat. She heard Trevor on his radio requesting additional units. She heard a woman near the parking lot barrier start to cry. One of the diner customers, probably, the adrenaline finally finding an exit. Ryan Pollard was looking at her in the way that people sometimes looked at her in the field, measuring, recalibrating, adjusting their model of who they were talking to. You've done device-adjacent work before, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Field medic attached to EOD-adjacent units in Helmand and Ninawa. I know enough to respect what you do without pretending I do it. He almost smiled. Good answer. Then more quietly, I'm going to need a formal statement. Your observation timeline, the dog's behavior, what you noticed about the container position. Everything you can give me. I can do that. And Maya? He stopped. She turned back. Whoever did this, he glanced toward the state troopers, toward the growing cluster of official vehicles. They thought this place was going to be empty of anyone who'd know what to look for. She waited. They were wrong, he said, because you decided to stop for breakfast. Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Raven, still lying on the tailgate across the lot, chin on her paws, watching her with the patient attention that had not changed once in 6 years. She decided, Maya said. She walked back toward the truck. Behind her, the investigation into who had planted the device inside Kettner's Diner was just beginning, and it was already moving in directions that nobody in that parking lot had anticipated. Least of all, the man who had built it. The man who had built it hadn't counted on a retired military dog with a bad leg and a nose that still worked better than any machine the county owned. That thought stayed with Maya, while Ryan Pollard walked back toward his team and the state troopers continued their quiet, systematic work of turning a Tuesday breakfast into a crime scene. She sat on the tailgate again. Raven had shifted while she was gone, rolling onto her side with her legs stretched long, and Maya settled one hand on the dog's ribs and felt the steady rise and fall. The parking lot had gotten louder in the past 10 minutes. 2 more sheriff's vehicles had arrived, and a black SUV with Tennessee Bureau of Investigation plates was parked at an angle near the entrance, which meant this had already moved up a chain that went above the county level. That was fast. That told Maya something about how seriously Pollard's initial read had been received. She watched the TBI agents, 3 of them, 2 men and a woman in plain clothes, move efficiently through the lot, taking position and beginning what would be a long process of separating, interviewing, and documenting everyone who'd been inside the diner. The customers who'd been evacuated were clustered in groups near the parking lot barrier, some on their phones, some just standing there with the particular stillness of people who hadn't fully landed yet. Trevor came over and stood near the truck. He had his notebook out, which meant this wasn't a social call. I need to take your formal statement before the TBI takes over the interviews, he said. You okay with that? Yes. He clicked his pen. Walk me through it from the beginning, from when you arrived. She did. She took her time and she was precise about the sequence. Her arrival time, where she parked, the interaction with Darren, the exact moment she'd noticed Raven's behavior change, what the dog's indication looked like, where she'd been positioned relative to the container. Trevor wrote without interrupting, which she appreciated. She'd given statements before in other contexts, and bad interviewers couldn't resist cutting in. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, reviewing his notes. How confident are you in the timing? When Raven first started to react. We'd been in the booth approximately 12 minutes. The change in her behavior it wasn't gradual. One moment she was down, the next she was tracking. That's a clean scent hit, not ambient drift. She'd never been in that diner before? Never. No prior exposure to the location that could create a false read? Maya looked at him. I told you, she doesn't false indicate. I'm asking for the record. For the record, no prior exposure, no conditioned response to the location. Her training is explosive specific. She doesn't react to food waste or cleaning products or anything that a Kettner's diner would have in normal operation. She paused. What's in the container is what set her off. Trevor wrote that down, looked up. One more thing. The manager, Darren Vale. How would you characterize his behavior during the initial confrontation? Maya thought about it for a moment. Not because the answer was complicated, but because she wanted to give him the accurate version and not the satisfying one. Dismissive. Confident he was right, not interested in information that contradicted his position. She stopped. He wasn't malicious, he just wasn't listening. He called the police to have you removed. He did. And then followed you into the service corridor after you identified a potential threat and was still arguing the point. He was. She watched Trevor write that down. Is that going to be a problem for him? Depends on what the investigation finds. Trevor capped his pen. Thank you, Ms. Holt. The TBI is going to want to talk to you separately. I figured. He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. The angle of the morning light had shifted, and it caught his face differently, younger looking somehow than he'd seemed when he first walked into the diner. What you did in there, he said, staying calm, not letting him push you out. Most people, he shook his head. Most people would have just left. Maya looked at Raven, who had fallen asleep. Most people haven't had Raven for 6 years, she said. The TBI interview took 40 minutes and was conducted by the female agent Maya had spotted earlier, a compact woman in her early 40s named Special Agent Dara Sims, who had the kind of controlled, unhurried manner that meant she'd probably been doing this for a long time and had stopped being impressed by difficult interviews somewhere around year 3. She had a recorder on the table between them. They were sitting in the back of an unmarked TBI vehicle, doors open to the morning air. Raven settled outside on a lead tied to the door handle. Sims started with the basics: name, background, current employment. She listened without reaction while Maya laid out her service record: 8 years, infantry battalion, then special operations attachment, combat medic with a specialty in trauma stabilization and explosive injury management. Sims wrote a few things, but mostly just listened. Raven's adoption, Sims said. You went through the official MWD program? Yes, there's a file with the program administrator at Fort Driscoll. Trevor Mullen has my documentation. You can request the full file. I will. Sims made a note. The handler who was killed? His name? A beat. Staff Sergeant Aaron Briggs, KIA, 14 months before my separation, Ninoa Province. Sims wrote that down. She didn't offer condolences, which was the right call. You've maintained Raven's training since separation? Monthly refreshers with a certified private contractor. Her indication behaviors haven't degraded. Maya looked at the agent. I knew she was right the moment she sat down. Walk me through the container again. Sims leaned forward slightly. Specifically what you observed before EOD arrived. Maya described it again. The lid slightly off register, the cardboard wedge, the way the placement felt deliberate rather than casual. Sims listened to the whole thing before asking her next question. The cardboard wedge, could that have been a routine thing? Kitchen staff propping it open for airflow? Possible. Maya kept her voice even. But Raven's reaction wasn't consistent with ambient odor diffusion. She was tracking a specific source. The wedge may have been what allowed enough scent dispersal for her to pick it up from the dining room. Sims regarded her for a moment. You know explosive chemistry? I know how scent works in the field. EOD briefed us extensively on what detection dogs can and can't find and why. I'm not an expert. I'm informed. That's a useful distinction. Sims glanced at her recorder, then back at Maya. I want to be direct with you about something. Go ahead. We're treating this as a deliberate mass casualty attempt. The device design is not consistent with local capability. We have some preliminary indicators about where the components may have originated, but that's still being worked. She paused. What I can tell you is that whoever placed it had familiarity with the building. The service entrance bypass was done with specific knowledge. They didn't guess where the secondary lock was. Maya processed that. Staff, or someone who'd done advanced work. Yes. Sims watched her. Do you have any connection to this location? Prior visits? Acquaintances on staff? Any reason someone would know you'd be stopping here this morning? The question landed differently than Maya expected. Not accusatory. Exploratory. She thought about it seriously before answering. I've never been here before. I pulled off because I needed coffee, and this was visible from the highway. I didn't tell anyone I was stopping. I'd just come off a 22-hour shift. I was heading straight home. She met Sims's eyes. I wasn't a factor in the planning of whatever this is. I was an accident. The best kind in this case. Sims clicked her pen. One more thing. Darren Vale, the manager. Have you had any prior contact with him? I met him this morning. He was aggressively trying to remove you from the premises. Yes. That didn't strike you as unusual given the timing? Maya paused. The question had a shape to it. She turned it over. You're asking if I think he was trying to get people out of the building. I'm asking what you observed. I observed someone who thought the rules of his establishment gave him authority over federal accommodation guidelines. I observed someone who called the police without checking what the law said first. She stopped. I don't think he knew what was in that container. If he'd wanted people out of the building, there were simpler ways to do it. He could have just closed for the day. He chose confrontation, which drew more attention to the situation, not less. Sims looked at her for a long moment. Then she made a note. Thank you, Ms. Holt. She reached over and stopped the recorder. One thing I want to say off the record. Okay. The margin this morning was very small. EOD puts assembly at approximately 40 minutes prior to your arrival. Timed device. Given normal breakfast traffic patterns, the device would have activated during peak hour. She let that sit. I want you to understand that we take that seriously. What you and your dog did this morning, we take that seriously. Maya nodded. She didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would have been true and also measured. She unclipped Raven's lead from the door handle and walked back out into the morning. By 9:45, Route 9 in both directions had been shut down for a quarter mile in each direction. The news van Maya had spotted earlier had been joined by two more, and the camera operators were at the parking lot barrier trying angles on the diner's facade. A second EOD vehicle had arrived from somewhere, different unit patch, different jurisdiction, which suggested this had moved into federal territory faster than the initial response indicated. Maya was still in the parking lot because Sims had asked her not to leave yet, and because there was nowhere else she particularly wanted to be. Carver Ridge had left her 3 voicemails during the TBI interview. Her charge supervisor, a scheduling question, something about the overnight paperwork she hadn't finished. She texted back, not available, will call later, and put her phone face down on the tailgate. Raven was sitting up now, watching the lot with the mild professional interest of an animal who found human activity comprehensible but not particularly urgent. Her ears moved at sounds. Her nose tracked the shifting air. She was, in some fundamental way, still working, even when no one had asked her to. That was the thing about Raven that Maya had never been able to adequately explain to people who asked about her. It wasn't that the dog was always alert, exactly. She could sleep, she could relax, she could be distracted by a thrown ball or a piece of food. But at some deeper level, she never fully stopped processing. The nose never stopped. The training never went quiet. It just ran in the background, the way a secondary system runs below the visible interface, doing its job without announcing itself. Maya thought about Aaron Briggs, the way she sometimes did when Raven did something that reminded her of their first year together. The way he'd talk to the dog during vehicle sweeps, casual and low, like he was just thinking out loud. Come on, girl, let's see what's here. You know you want to find something. The way Raven had worked for him with a kind of particular focus that wasn't about obedience, it was about genuine coordination. After he died, it had taken them 2 months to find their version of that. She heard footsteps on gravel. Not Trevor's. She'd learned his walk already, the slight drag of his right boot. These were quicker, harder, and she looked up to find a man she hadn't seen before moving toward her with the deliberate pace of someone who knows exactly where they're going. He was tall, early 50s, in a dark jacket that wasn't a uniform, but wasn't trying very hard to look like civilian clothes either. No badge visible, but the posture was unmistakable. The posture of someone who operated in spaces where badges were understood to be a formality. He stopped 3 feet from the truck and looked at her. Then he looked at Raven, then back at her. Maya Holt? Depends on who's asking. Agent Marcus Trent, Federal Task Force. He held up an ID. She looked at it long enough to read the agency designation. I've read your service file. I want to ask you something. I've already given a statement. This is different. He glanced around the lot, not conspicuously, just checking who was in earshot. The device we pulled this morning isn't the first one we've seen with this construction profile. We've been tracking a series. Maya went still. Still. How many? This would be 4. First 2 were successful. He let that land before continuing. Third was found and neutralized. That was 6 weeks ago in a different state. He looked at the diner. Whoever is doing this has been patient, spacing them out, changing locations. We haven't been able to establish the selection logic for the targets. Kettner's doesn't seem like a high-value target. None of them have been. That's what's notable. Trent looked back at her. We think the targets are random, public places, high pedestrian density, ordinary locations. He paused. The goal isn't ideological in the conventional sense. We think it's demonstrative. Someone's trying to prove they can do it. Someone's trying to build a record. His jaw was tight. And then escalate. The morning noise of the lot, the radio traffic, the camera crews at the barrier, the distant sound of a helicopter somewhere, felt like it was happening at a slightly greater distance than it actually was. Maya looked at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you were inside this morning, because your dog found it, and because he reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper, handed it to her. We pulled the security footage from the service alley. Whoever planted the device came through the back entrance at 4:17 this morning. She unfolded it. It was a printed still image, grainy, time-stamped. A figure in dark clothing moving through a corridor. The face was angled away from the camera, almost perfectly angled, which meant the person knew where the lens was. And at the bottom of the frame, just visible, was a partial image of their shoe. We matched the shoe print from the alley floor, Trent said. It's a specific manufacturer. Military surplus, no longer in production. We've seen the same print at 2 of the previous scenes. Maya looked at the image for a long time. What do you need from me? She asked. Right now? Nothing. I wanted you to know the scope of what you walked into this morning. He took the image back. But there's something else. She waited. The service alley at Kettner's connects to a rear access road that runs behind 3 properties on this block. One of those properties is a storage facility that had a unit rented under a false name 6 weeks ago. He folded the paper and put it back in his jacket. The rental was paid in cash. The name on the file is a dead end, but the unit was accessed twice, once 6 weeks ago, once 4 days ago. Right before the device was placed. Yes. He looked at her steadily. Someone was staging materials nearby, doing advance work on the location. The device wasn't constructed off-site and transported. It was assembled close by. Maya thought about what that meant in terms of timeline and patience. Someone who'd been watching this diner, or this stretch of Route 9, for weeks, who'd sourced the materials and assembled the device and timed their entry for 4 in the morning on a Tuesday when the diner would be closed and the alley would be quiet. Who'd known exactly where the secondary lock on the service entrance was. The manager, she said. Darren Vale. Trent's expression didn't change. We're looking at everyone who had building familiarity. He owns the location. He'd know the lock. He would. Trent's voice was careful. So would any contractor who'd done work on the building in the last 2 years. So would the food service delivery drivers who used that entrance. So would the previous owner who sold to Vale 18 months ago. He paused. We're not drawing lines yet. But you're not drawing them. For the first time, something that might have been the beginning of a wry expression crossed his face. I'm not drawing them, he confirmed. He took a card from his jacket pocket and held it out. Keep this. Don't go far today if you can help it. I may need to talk to you again. She took it. He walked back toward the cluster of federal vehicles without looking back. Raven watched him go with the patient attention she gave to everything that moved. Maya turned the card over in her fingers. She wasn't thinking about Trent, or the device, or the surveillance footage of a figure who knew where the camera was. She was thinking about what he'd said. 4 devices. First 2 successful. Successful was a word that meant people died. She thought about the morning, the drive, the sign with its missing letter, the waitress with the coffee pot who'd called her on and hadn't given the dog a second thought. She thought about the family of four with the two kids who'd been at the table 3 booths over, the father who'd had his arm on the seat back like he was about to say something to his wife. 31 people. She folded Trent's card into her jacket pocket and put her hand on Raven's back. The dog leaned into her, warm and solid and entirely present, and they stayed like that while the investigation spread out around them and the morning deepened into something neither of them had planned on. It was Trevor who came back to her 40 minutes later, and his face had changed in a way that was specific enough that she stood up from the tailgate before he reached her. "What happened?" she said. He stopped, looked at her for a moment like he was deciding how to frame something. "The security footage," he said, "from inside the diner. We've been going through it. Okay. There's something on there," he paused. "Something that... it changes the picture of this morning." Maya looked at him. "The figure from the alley?" "No." He shook his head. "Someone else. On the dining room footage. From before you arrived." The morning air had gone completely still. Somewhere past the barrier, a news camera was probably pointed in their direction, catching the shapes of this conversation without the sound. "Who?" Maya said. Trevor looked uncomfortable in the particular way people look when the answer they have is going to change the shape of everything that came before it. "Someone who was inside the diner this morning," he said, "before the device was supposed to go off. Someone who sat in the dining room for 20 minutes and then left through the front 6 minutes before you walked in." He watched her face. "And who drove a vehicle that we've now matched to the storage unit access records from 4 days ago?" The air between them went very quiet. "You're telling me," Maya said slowly, "that the person who built the device came back this morning?" "We think so, yes." "To watch." "That's what the footage suggests." She looked at the diner, at the parking lot, at the barrier and the cameras and the vehicles and all the machinery of a response that had arrived too late to catch someone who had already walked out the front door and driven away. "Do you have a plate?" she asked. "We have a partial. TBI and federal both have it." He exhaled. "They're running it now." Maya stood very still. If the person had left 6 minutes before she arrived, if they'd sat there and waited through their own countdown and then walked out when they were satisfied, then they would have been on the highway when her truck pulled into the lot. They might have passed her coming the other way. She might have driven past the person who'd built the device that was supposed to kill 31 people. "Maya," Trevor's voice was careful, "there's something else." She looked at him. "The vehicle," he said, "the partial plate, and the make and model. It's been flagged in connection with one of the previous incidents, the one 6 weeks ago." He stopped. "Which means whoever this is, they're not just coming back to watch. They're escalating the pattern. They're getting closer to the scene." Raven made a low sound, Schatz, not a growl, not a bark, just a sound from deep in her chest, the kind she made sometimes when something in the air shifted that only she could feel. Maya looked down at her, then back at Trevor. "They're going to try again," she said. Trevor didn't answer. He didn't have to. The word again sat in the air between them like something with weight. Trevor's radio clicked and he turned away to answer it, walking a few steps off. And Maya stood with her hand on Raven's back and worked through what she'd just been told. Not emotionally. She didn't have the bandwidth for emotional right now. But tactically, the way she'd been trained to think through information in the field when the situation was still in motion and decisions had consequences. Someone had built the device, had staged materials nearby, assembled it close to the target, planted it in the early hours. Had then returned that same morning and sat in the dining room for 20 minutes, not eating probably, or maybe ordering something small to justify the presence, and waited, and then left. 6 minutes before Maya walked in. The question was why they left when they did. Not because the timer was close. Pollard's team had estimated 40-plus minutes remaining on the device when EOD arrived, and that was after Maya's evacuation, which had taken additional time. So whoever it was hadn't left because they were cutting it close. They'd left because something changed. Something in the diner changed between the moment they sat down and the moment they walked out. Maya thought about that. What had changed 6 minutes before she arrived? Nothing. From the inside. She hadn't been visible from the diner. The parking lot wasn't in the sight line of the front windows, based on the layout she'd observed, but the road was. If someone was sitting near the front of the dining room, near the windows that faced the highway, They would have had a direct view of Route 9. They might have seen her truck turn in. She pulled out Trent's card and called the number on it. He picked up on the second ring. "It's Maya Holt, the person who left before I arrived. Where were they sitting?" "Inside the diner." A pause. "Hold on." She heard him moving, voices in the background. "Front section, left window table. Route 9 view, direct sightline." "They saw me come in," she said. "That's why they left." Another pause, longer. That would fit the timing. "Which means they saw the truck. Maybe saw Raven through the window before we even got to the door." She kept her voice level. "A military working dog vest is identifiable at distance to someone who knows what to look for. If they had any exposure to MWD programs, they made you," Trent said. "They recognized a detection dog. That's not the same as making me specifically." She stopped. "But it doesn't matter. They saw a K9 and they left, which means they know the device is still in there, which means they know it'll be found." "Yes." "Which means they're already adjusting." The line was quiet for 2 seconds. "Ms. Holt, I need you to stay in that parking lot. Don't go anywhere without notifying me." "I'm not planning to go anywhere," she paused. "But Trent, if they're escalating, if they're getting closer to their own scenes, that's not normal behavior for this kind of operation." "No," he said, "it's not. Someone who builds devices and then comes to watch them go off, that's a different psychological profile than someone who plants and disappears. They want to see it. They want to be present for it." She kept her voice flat, clinical. "That's someone who's building toward something. The demonstration isn't the end game. The demonstration is the rehearsal." The word landed in her own ear with more weight than she'd intended. "Stay in the lot," Trent said, and ended the call. It was 11:20 when things broke open in a direction no one had fully prepared for. Maya had been sitting in the cab of her truck with Raven for the past 40 minutes, the windows cracked, half watching the lot activity and half doing the specific mental task of not falling asleep that comes from being awake for going on 25 hours. She'd eaten one of the granola bars from her bag and given Raven a chew treat from the container she kept in the center console, and they'd existed in the quiet together in the way they'd gotten good at over 3 years. Then Trevor knocked on the passenger window, and his face was doing a thing she hadn't seen on it yet: controlled urgency, the expression of someone who's gotten information that has changed the timeline. She pushed the door open. "They got a hit on the partial plate," he said. "Vehicle was registered to a shell company. Company address is a UPS store in Harwick County, 2 counties over." He stopped. "But there's a secondary match. Same vehicle was caught on a traffic camera 40 minutes ago." Maya waited. "It's on Route 9 westbound." He looked at her steadily. "Heading toward Millhaven." "Millhaven, Haven, her town, 40 minutes on the highway." "That's coincidence," she said, because she needed to say it out loud and hear how it sounded. "Could be," Trevor said. It sounded hollow. "Or they circled back to observe the response," she said, "which fits the escalating proximity pattern. TBI has a unit moving. Trent's coordinating." "What's in Millhaven on Route 9? "West end of town. There's a civic center. Harwick County Farmers Market is running today. It's a Tuesday rotation. They set up in the civic center parking lot. Opens at 10. He paused. "Tuesday is their peak attendance day. Families, seniors, they get 200-300 people through there on a good Tuesday morning." Maya was already out of the truck. She didn't run. Running in a parking lot full of law enforcement drew exactly the wrong kind of attention. But she moved fast to where Trent was standing near the federal vehicles, and he saw her coming and held up one hand. "I know," he said before she could speak. "If the vehicle is heading west on Route 9 and the farmers market is running, I know. We have units moving." "How many?" 2 TBI units and a county sheriff response." "Do they know what they're looking for in terms of device construction? Do they have EOD?" "EOD from Fort Driscoll is being redirected." Trent's voice was the particular flat of someone managing 6 things simultaneously. "They're 12 minutes out from the Civic Center." "And the vehicle?" "Traffic camera puts it at Route 9 mile marker 44, 38 minutes ago. Moving at highway speed." He did the math the same time she did. "It's possible it's already there." "The farmer's market opened at 10. It was 11:22. "You need a detection dog at that site," Maya said. Trent looked at her. His expression didn't change exactly, but something in it recalibrated. Our K-9 unit is 30 minutes out from Mill Haven. I'm 10 minutes out. She held his gaze. Raven is the only reason you know there's a pattern to follow right now. Let me take her in. You're a civilian. I'm a former combat medic with an active certified detection dog who has already found one device this morning. She kept her voice level. Your K-9 unit is 30 minutes out. EOD is 12 minutes out. If that device is already in place and the market is running, that's 200 people in an open lot with no cover and a timer they don't know about. Trent was quiet for 3 seconds, which Maya had learned was what 3 seconds of serious deliberation looked like on his face. You do not engage, he said. You do not approach any identified device. You sweep, you indicate, you report. That is the entire scope. Yes. You stay in contact with me. Earpiece. He turned and said something to one of his team, who produced a radio earpiece and handed it over. Trevor rides with you. He's your law enforcement contact on site. Trevor, who had apparently followed her over and was standing 3 feet back, said copy before anyone asked him. Trent looked at Raven, who was sitting at Maya's heel with her vest on, ears fully forward. You trust this dog, he said. More than I trust most people, Maya said. Go. The drive to Mill Haven was 9 minutes at the speed Trevor drove, which was not a speed that corresponded to any posted limit on Route 9. He had his lights on, but not his siren. Intentional, Maya understood. You didn't want sirens approaching a potential device site if there was any possibility of a remote trigger, and they didn't yet know what they were dealing with. She sat in the passenger seat with Raven's head on her shoulder from the back, which was not regulation anything but which Maya allowed because the dog was warm and breathing and present, and that helped. What do we know about the Civic Center layout? She asked. Trevor was already on his phone. Parking lot on the west side, that's where the market sets up. Main building is brick. 1 story, public restrooms accessible from the exterior. Market has about 30 vendor stalls, produce, baked goods, local crafts, standard setup. Access points to this building? 3 exterior doors, main entrance front, service entrance back, side door near the restrooms. Maya thought about the trash container at Kettner's. Service access, secondary entrance, somewhere that had both concealment and a plausible reason to have large containers nearby. Restroom entrance, she said. That's where I'd look first. I'll relay that to EOD. Don't. Let Raven work without a predetermined search priority. If I tell EOD where to look and I'm wrong, they'll spend time on the wrong area. Trevor glanced at her. Okay. She put her earpiece in. Immediately heard Trent's voice running through a situation update with someone she didn't recognize. Federal frequency, clipped and efficient. She listened without interrupting. Units were being positioned at the market perimeter. They were attempting a quiet approach. No visible law enforcement response that might trigger either a panicked crowd or a remote detonation, if that was in play. The goal was to get Raven in before any overt law enforcement presence made the situation visible, which meant they had a window. How are we going in? Trevor asked. I walk in with my dog like I'm at the farmer's market. Maya looked at her clothes. Scrubs with a coffee stain, sneakers with blood she hadn't had a chance to deal with, hair that had given up. She looked like a person coming from a shift, which was exactly what she was. Raven's vest is on. If anyone asks, she's a registered service animal. Most people aren't going to look twice. And if someone does look twice, then we deal with that. She looked at him. You stay at the perimeter. Visible law enforcement will change the behavior of anyone watching. Trent said I was your contact on site. You are. Perimeter contact. She held his gaze. I've done building sweeps with Raven in active environments. Market conditions are easier than anything I've worked in. Let me do this the right way. Trevor's jaw moved. He didn't like it. She could see that clearly. But he was smart enough to know she was right. Earpiece stays in, he said. It stays in. He pulled off Route 9 into a residential side street 2 blocks from the Civic Center and parked. They could see the edge of the market from here, the tops of the white canopy tents, the color of stacked produce, a line of maybe 40 people moving through the entrance at the far end of the lot. Ordinary Tuesday morning, kids on someone's shoulders, a woman with a reusable bag full of something green. Maya clipped Raven's lead, opened her door, and walked. The Mill Haven Civic Center Farmers Market. Smelled like cut flowers and warm bread and the particular sweetness of overripe peaches in the morning sun, and it was exactly the kind of place that made no sense as a target until you thought about it the way someone with a specific kind of damage in them thought about it. 200 people in an open space, minimal cover, one access road in and out, a crowd that trusted the ordinariness of what they were doing. Maya walked in through the main entrance with Raven at her left heel. No one stopped them. 2 vendors glanced at the dog and went back to their tables. A child pointed and a parent redirected. She started the sweep the way she always had, working upwind first, letting Raven set the pace, not pulling her toward any specific target and not holding her back from anything she wanted to investigate. Raven moved with the loose, purposeful stride that was her working gait, nose active but not locked, processing the composite air of the space, sorting through 200 competing sensory inputs to find the one that didn't belong. They moved through the produce section, past the bread vendor, past a table of locally made jam and a rack of handmade quilts, through the organic honey stall, which Raven acknowledged with 2 sniffs and moved past, and the livestock products table with its cured meats, which she gave a wider berth because she knew the difference between interesting and relevant. Maya watched her ears. Raven's ears were the tell. When they went full forward and locked, that was the signal that something had moved from ambient processing to active tracking. Halfway through the market, Raven's left ear moved. Not both, just the left, which meant she was catching something directional, a source with a specific origin point rather than ambient dispersal. Maya slowed her pace without making it obvious, let the lead go fractionally looser to give Raven room to orient. The dog turned 45 degrees to the right, toward the building, toward the side door that led to the public restrooms. Maya kept walking at market pace, not directly toward the door, letting the angle close gradually, as if they were just browsing toward the back of the lot. Her pulse had picked up. She regulated her breathing, the same technique she'd used before entering uncertain structures, a deliberate 4 count in and out that kept the hands steady and the eyes clear. She pressed her earpiece. Raven is tracking, moving toward the side entrance, east wall of the building. Trent's voice came back immediately. EOD is 90 seconds out from the lot. Tell them to hold at the perimeter until I give you a location. Copy. She was 20 feet from the side door now. Raven's stride had changed, shorter, more focused, the loose working gait compressing into the tight, purposeful movement that meant the scent was getting stronger. Both ears were fully forward now, 10 feet. The door was propped open with a rubber wedge, standard for a public facility during a busy morning. The restroom saw high traffic. The door was propped to avoid constant opening. Raven moved through it without hesitation, and Maya followed her into the dim corridor. Institutional lighting, concrete floor, the smell of industrial cleaner and old plumbing, 2 doors marked with restroom symbols, a janitor's closet at the far end, door closed, and beside the janitor's closet, a commercial maintenance cart, the kind with shelves and a waste basket attachment, used by cleaning crews, entirely ordinary in this environment. Entirely ordinary. Raven sat down. The indication was clean and hard and final. Maya's hand went to her earpiece. Confirmed indication, maintenance cart, interior corridor, east side of Civic Center, approximately 30 feet from the side entrance. She kept her voice below conversational level. Get EOD in here. On the way, Trent said. Begin evacuation. She looked at the corridor. She was alone in it. Whoever had brought the cart in had done so at some point before the market opened, which meant before 10 a.m., which meant either during setup or very early in the morning when the building was being prepared for the day. She thought about the shoe print, the same manufacturer at multiple scenes. She thought about someone who liked to come back and watch. Raven, heel. She kept her voice low and steady. The dog came to her side, and Maya turned back toward the side door and the market beyond it. The evacuation was going to have to happen now, and it was going to be loud. And whoever had been watching this location, if they were watching, was going to know what it meant the moment the crowd started moving. She pushed through the side door into the morning light and stopped. Because there was a man standing at the edge of the building, not at the market, not in the vendor area, not moving toward the entrance or away from it. Standing at the edge of the building, in the narrow strip between the exterior wall and the parking lot barrier, looking at his phone. I was in his 30s, medium build, dark jacket, despite the morning warmth. and he hadn't looked up when she came through the door. But Raven had looked at him. Not the indication behavior, not the tracking posture, not the locked ears, something different. The particular full-body attention the dog gave to a thing that had registered as specifically relevant. Not a device. A person. Maya had seen this before. Twice, in field operations. Raven tracking a human presence associated with the scene rather than the device itself. Handler scent recognition. The dog didn't know this person, but she'd processed something. Residue, material, something that connected this man to what was behind the door. The man looked up from his phone. His eyes found Maya first, then Raven. He went very still. Maya didn't move. She kept her breathing even, her posture casual, her hand on Raven's lead with exactly the same pressure as before. She had no weapon, no authority, and she was alone in a strip of asphalt between an exterior wall and a parking barrier with a man who might or might not be exactly what every instinct she had was telling her he was. "Morning," she said. His eyes dropped to Raven's vest, came back up to Maya's face, and then he turned and walked toward the parking lot. "Trent?" She kept her voice level and pressed the earpiece. "I have a possible subject, male, mid-30s, dark jacket, moving toward the west parking lot from the east building wall." He reacted to Raven. "Is he running? Walking fast? Can you maintain visual?" "Yes." She was already moving, keeping the distance between them constant without closing it, which was all she could responsibly do without being law enforcement and without putting herself in a position she couldn't control. "He's moving toward the vehicles on the west side." She heard Trent relaying, heard Trevor's voice come on. He was at the perimeter. He had a visual angle on the lot. "I see him," Trevor said. "Don't approach yet," Trent said. "Let him move toward the vehicle. We get a full plate, we have the case." The man was moving faster now, not running. The particular controlled urgency of someone who's told themselves not to run, but whose body has received a different message. He cut through a gap between two parked vehicles, and Maya lost the direct line of sight for 4 seconds. When she came around the bumper of a minivan, he was at a dark blue sedan, keys already out. "He's at the vehicle," she said. "Trevor, you have a clean view?" "Partial." Trevor's voice cut. "Plate is—" The sedan started, and then, from the north entrance of the lot, a TBI unit vehicle came in fast and hard, lights on, not a quiet approach anymore. Someone had made a call, and the window for quiet had closed. The sedan's driver saw it. Brake lights. A second of stillness. Maya was 30 feet away. Raven made the sound again, the one from the truck, the low resonant sound from deep in her chest. And Maya's hand tightened on the lead because the dog had taken a step forward, and whatever she was processing, it wasn't the device in the corridor anymore. The sedan reversed out of the space too fast, clipped the bumper of the car behind it, and came out at an angle that was wrong for the exit. The TBI vehicle was blocking the north entrance. The driver had 3 seconds to pick a direction and made the one that made sense to them, and almost none to anyone else. He accelerated toward the market entrance, which was not a vehicle entrance, which was a pedestrian lane with canopy tents on both sides, and people who had no idea what was happening. Someone screamed, vendors scattered, tables went over. Maya heard the sound of a tent frame hitting something metal. And then Trevor's car came through the south entrance with its lights on, and the sedan had nowhere left to go. It stopped. For about 4 seconds, nothing happened. The sedan sat angled across the pedestrian lane, with its engine running and 2 law enforcement vehicles at opposite ends of the lot, and 200 people at varying stages of understanding what they were watching. The driver's door opened. The man got out with his hands up. His jacket had ridden up, and Maya could see, even from 30 feet away, that his right forearm was bandaged. Not a hospital bandage, a field wrap, the kind that goes on an injury sustained in an environment where stopping for medical attention isn't an option. Trevor was already out of his car with his weapon drawn. The man went to his knees in the parking lot with his hands still up, and the morning tipped into a chaos of voices and radios and the sound of EOD entering the building through the side door behind Maya. Raven sat down beside her, both ears forward, every line of her body aimed at the man on the ground 30 feet away. Maya stood there and breathed. It should have felt like an ending. The device found, the subject in custody, the crowd intact. It should have had the particular exhale quality of a crisis past. But something was wrong. She couldn't name it yet. It was the same instinct that had kept her alive through 8 years of impossible places. The knowledge that the situation you could see was rarely the whole situation, that the thing that felt like a conclusion was sometimes just the next layer peeling back. She pressed her earpiece. "Trent." "I see it," he said. He was coming across the lot now, moving fast. "He came back again," she said. Third scene. First time was observation. Second time was observation. This time he stayed. She watched the man being put on the ground by Trevor and the TBI unit. Why did the pattern change? Trent was at her shoulder now. He was looking at the same thing she was looking at, and his jaw was tight. "Trent," she said, "why did he stay this time?" "We don't know yet." He didn't stay to watch the device go off. "We were already here. EOD was incoming. The scene was already compromised." She turned to look at him. He stayed because he was waiting for something specific, or someone. Trent looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, but a controlled, very deliberate stillness, the kind that precedes a piece of information that changes the shape of everything. "Inside," he said quietly. "We need to talk about what we found in the TBI database 20 minutes ago. About the device construction profile." "What about it?" He glanced at the market, at the crowd, at Trevor now coordinating the subject's custody, at the EOD team working behind the side door. "The third scene," he said, 6 weeks ago. The device that was found and neutralized." He paused. "The person who found it wasn't law enforcement. It was a civilian with a detection dog." Maya went still. The report listed the civilian's background as military medical prior special operations attachment. Trent's voice was very careful. "We didn't make the connection until an hour ago because the name in the report was listed under prior legal name." Her ears were ringing slightly. "What name?" "Aaron Briggs," he said. "The dog handler listed as the civilian's former partner." The morning stopped. "That report was sealed," she said. Her voice came from somewhere far away. "That report was classified. The civilian's identity was protected." "It was." Trent held her gaze. "Which means whoever has been building these devices has access to sealed federal incident reports." Raven pressed against Maya's leg. "He wasn't watching the devices," Maya said. "No." "He was looking for you," Trent said. "The pattern didn't change because he was escalating the operation." He stopped. "The pattern changed because he found what he was looking for." The man on the ground 30 feet away, hands cuffed now, Trevor talking into his radio, the TBI agent photographing the scene, turned his head, looked directly at Maya, and smiled. That smile was the thing that stayed with her. Not the arrest, not the chaos of the market evacuation, the overturned vendor tables, the EOD team working behind the side door with the careful efficiency of people who understood what the margin looked like when it got this thin. Not Trent's voice in her ear running through implications she was still processing. The smile, deliberate, held for exactly the right number of seconds, aimed at her specifically, was what lodged itself in the center of her chest and didn't move. She'd seen that expression before. Not on this man's face, but in a category of person she'd encountered in certain very specific operational environments. The expression of someone who has decided the outcome of a situation before it is concluded, who is, on some level, still playing. Trevor had the subject face down and cuffed within 40 seconds of the sedan stopping. The TBI unit moved in immediately after, and the subject was transferred to federal custody before he'd been on the ground for 3 minutes. Efficient, practiced, the machinery of a response that had been waiting for exactly this kind of conclusion. But he'd smiled before they got to him, which meant he'd had time to decide to smile, which meant some part of his mind, even in the moment of being taken, was occupied with something other than the immediate reality of being arrested. He was thinking about the next move, or the move that had already been made. Maya pressed her earpiece. "Trent, what's in the vehicle?" "Team is on it now. Priority on any secondary devices and on communications equipment. Phone, tablet, anything with recent activity. Already in the protocol." A pause. "Maya, I need you at the command east end of the lot." She walked Raven away from the immediate scene and toward the cluster of law enforcement vehicles at the lot's east boundary. The market had been fully evacuated now. The vendors had pulled back with the practiced resignation of people who'd been told to stop and had done it before. and the customers had filtered out through the north entrance in a mass of confusion and phone cameras that made Maya's stomach tighten. Whatever operational containment they'd had on the public picture of this morning was gone. It had been gone since the sedan came through the pedestrian lane and tables went over. By noon, this would be everywhere. She found Trent at the command post, a folding table beside one of the federal vehicles, a laptop open, two agents running communications on either side. He was on his phone. He ended the call when he saw her. "Talk to me about Aaron Briggs," she said. He looked at her for a moment, measuring, the way he'd done several times today, deciding how much she needed to know versus how much she was entitled to. "Everything," she said. "I've been awake for going on 26 hours. I found 2 devices this morning with my dog, and you just told me someone has been tracking me through a sealed incident report associated with my dead partner's name. You don't get to measure that." Trent looked at the table, nodded once. 6 weeks ago, a device was found at a community center in Draper County, 2 states north of here. The person who found it was not law enforcement. She was a former military medic attending a weekend event there with a retired MWD. He kept his voice flat. "The incident report was filed through the local sheriff's office and flagged to the federal task force because of the device construction profile. It matched our series," he paused. "The civilian's identity was protected in the report, listed only as a female veteran, prior service, handler history with a deceased partner, MWD adoption. Her full name, location, and current employment were sealed. Someone accessed that seal. The file was accessed twice in the past 6 weeks through a federal contractor portal. The access credentials used belonged to an employee of a defense logistics contractor with clearance-adjacent database access." He looked at her. "That employee's credentials were reported compromised 3 months ago. We've been tracking the breach. We didn't connect it to this case until this morning." Maya worked through the chain. A credentials breach. A sealed report accessed. Her profile. Not by name, but by enough identifiers. Female, medical background, prior service, Ninawa Province, deceased partner, Belgian Malinois, Tennessee. Someone had built a search from those parameters. "He was looking for someone who could find his devices," she said. Trent looked at her. "That's what the behavioral profile suggests, yes." "Not to stop him, to find them." She stopped. "He wanted them found. He wanted the response, the drama, the public disruption." She looked at the Civic Center building. The first 2 devices, the ones that were successful. What were the targets like? Small venues, low profile. The response was limited. Local law enforcement, no federal involvement, no media attention outside the immediate area. He was dissatisfied, she said. The demonstration wasn't landing the way he wanted it to. Trent was quiet. So he changed the approach. He didn't make the devices bigger. He made them findable. She said it slowly, watching the shape of it form. He constructed them to be detectable by a trained MWD. He placed them where a sweep would work. He started coming back to the scenes to observe the response. And when the 3rd device was found by a civilian with a detection dog, and it generated exactly the kind of response he was looking for, she stopped. "He went looking for her." "For you," Trent said. "I wasn't at the 3rd scene." "No, but the report identified enough specifics, the dog's breed, the handler's background, the region, that with the right database access, the search narrows fast." He paused. "We think he identified you approximately 2 weeks ago. The Kettner's device was placed 4 days ago." Maya stood with that for a moment. He'd chosen the diner, somewhere on her regular route, or a route he'd predicted, because her home address was probably in the same database, which meant he knew where she lived, which meant he'd been able to construct a geographic profile, which meant, "Raven," she said. Trent looked at her. The report identified the dog's breed and retirement status. If he had enough information to locate me, he had enough information to know about the dog. She felt the pieces click into alignment and didn't like what they made. He built the device at Kettner's to be findable by her. He came back to watch the response. He saw us together. He confirmed the identification. "And then he followed you," Trent said quietly, "or anticipated your route. Millhaven is where I live. If he had my address, he didn't need to follow me. He just needed to set up in the right place." She looked at him. "What is his name?" Trent held her gaze. "The ID in the vehicle came back to a Marcus Darrow. We're running it." "Is it real?" "Probably not. He glanced at his laptop where one of his agents was running searches. But the vehicle title, the storage unit rental, the contractor credential breach, they all have a signature. We're building the real identity now. How long? Hours, maybe less. He looked at her. I want to be direct with you about something. She waited. This individual has been building toward a specific kind of event. The escalation isn't random and it isn't simple. Devices, response, observation, then a deliberate hunt for the person who found the devices. His jaw was tight. This is a fixation case. He's not just executing a plan. He's developed a focus. On me. On the scenario. You're the protagonist of the scenario he's constructed. He paused. Which means taking him into custody this morning may not be the end of the problem. Because he has help. Trent looked at her steadily. 2 devices in 2 locations in one morning, she said. He can't be in 2 places at once. Someone placed the Kettner's device. Someone who knew the building. She stopped. Darren Vale. We've had Vale in interview since 9:15, Trent said. He's been cooperative. His account has been consistent. That's not an answer. No, he admitted. It's not. He glanced toward the Civic Center. EOD just cleared the maintenance cart. Device construction matches, Kettner's identically. Same components, same assembly method, same timer design. This isn't 2 different people building devices. So Darrow, or whatever his name is, built both. But the Kettner's device was planted at 4 in the morning by someone who knew the building's secondary lock. She looked at Trent. Who has building access history at Kettner's? That investigation is still open. Darren Vale has owned that building for 18 months. He'd know the secondary lock. He'd have keys. She kept her voice level. And he was very, very eager to get everyone out of that building this morning. Trent said nothing. You said his account has been consistent, Maya said. Consistent with what he told you. What does the footage say? A pause. The particular pause of someone who has information they've been deciding about. The interior footage from Kettner's, Trent said carefully, shows Vale entering the service corridor at 2:47 a.m. The timestamp is verified. The air went out of the morning. He propped the door, Maya said. We believe so. He didn't plant the device. He provided access. She could see it clearly now. The secondary lock bypassed not with knowledge of the system, but with a key. A door left propped or unlocked for a specific window. Someone who lived in the community, who owned a building, who had local legitimacy that a traveler passing through didn't have. He's not the architect. He's the facilitator. That's our current read, yes. Which means when I walked in this morning and Darren Vale tried to have me removed, that wasn't just arrogance. She stopped. He knew what was in the building. He knew the timer was running. He was trying to clear the space before it went off. We don't know yet whether he understood the full scope of, he let me sit down, Maya said. He didn't try to stop me at the door. He waited until I was inside and had ordered and was eating, and then he came to the table. The sequence of it settled cold and certain in her chest. If he'd wanted to clear the diner cleanly, he would have found a reason before we ordered. He let us in and then tried to get us out. He was managing the optics. He wanted the diner to look normally operational until it wasn't. Trent looked at her for a long moment. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. Vale is still in interview, he said. He needs different questions, she said. She wasn't in the room when they re-interviewed Darren Vale, which was appropriate and expected and still felt like standing on the wrong side of a door. She sat in a folding chair outside the mobile interview unit, a converted communications van parked at the Civic Center's south lot, with Raven's head on her knee and Trent's card in her hand, turning it over the way she turned things over when she was too tired to think straight, and thinking straight was still required. 27 hours without sleep. She'd crossed from functional exhaustion into the particular clarity that sometimes came after, the kind where the noise dropped out and what was left was just the essential shape of things. She'd been in this state before, in field environments, and she'd learned not to trust it entirely, but not to ignore it either. The essential shape of this morning, a man with a fixation had built a plan around finding someone he'd read about in a sealed report. He'd used local help to access a building. He'd constructed devices designed to be found, generated the response he wanted, confirmed her identity, and then set up a second device in her own town, on a Tuesday morning when a market was running, and come to watch. He'd smiled because he'd been seen, and he'd wanted to be seen, which meant the arrest, as necessary as it was, as real as it was also something he'd been willing to absorb. You didn't construct a plan this elaborate and this patient, and then smile when it ended. You smiled when it was going where you'd intended. She pressed her earpiece. Trent, what was in the phone? Encrypted. Our technical team is on it. How long? Could be hours, could be tomorrow. Depends on the encryption level. What about the vehicle? Registered components. Nothing overt. A pause. We did find something in the spare tire well. She waited. A folder. Printed documents. His voice was careful. Your personnel file. Carver Ridge employee records. A printout from what appears to be a social media profile. Not yours, a friend's, that tagged your location 3 weeks ago. He paused. And a photograph. Of what? Of this parking lot, taken approximately 4 days ago, based on the metadata. Before the market, when the lot was empty. He stopped. He cased it, Maya. He was here before the device went in. She looked at the Civic Center. The white canopy tents were still up, the vendors' tables still overturned from the sedan's path through the pedestrian lane. A woman in an apron was talking to a sheriff's deputy near the produce section, gesturing at something on the ground. Where does the Vail interview stand? She asked. He's asked for counsel, which was his right, and which also told her something. People who asked for counsel when they were genuinely innocent usually did it with a different body language than people who asked for it because they knew what the questions were going to get to. There's a second person, she said. We're working the network. No, I mean in addition to Vail. The building access at Kettner's accounts for the device placement. But someone provided the sealed report information to Darrow, someone with contractor portal access who either sold it or was compromised. She stood up, and Raven stood with her. You said the credentials belonged to a specific employee. Reported compromised, Trent said. The employee filed the report themselves. Have you talked to them? A pause, longer than the previous ones. The employee's name is on our list for interview, he said. They're currently unreachable, reported on leave. Maya walked to the edge of the command area and stood in the sun. The morning had gone past noon now. The light had that particular overhead quality of midday in Tennessee in late summer, flat and honest and without shadows. Somewhere past the market entrance, a news helicopter was visible against the sky, circling at the distance where it could see the scene but not be asked to land. Where does he live? She asked. The employee. That's not something I can share with you. Trent. Maya. His voice was firm. You've done extraordinary work today. Twice. I am not understating that, but there are boundaries here that I'm not crossing. She let it go. Not because she'd stopped thinking about it, but because pushing wouldn't get her what she needed, and there was another angle. The fixation behavior, she said. You have a behavioral analyst on this? Since week 2 of the series. What does the profile say about how he responds to planned disruption? Hold on. She heard him moving, voices. Then a different voice, a woman, brief, efficient, and then Trent back. The profile says escalation is the consistent response. When device 1 was successful and generated minimal response, he escalated the target profile. When the Draper County device was found and generated significant response, he escalated to active target pursuit. He paused. The analyst's view is that a successful arrest without the scenario concluding the way he intended would register as planned disruption. And his response to planned disruption is escalation. Yes. Which means someone else moves, she said. A backup, a continuation, something already in place that activates if he doesn't. The line was quiet. Do you have a third device? She asked. Trent's voice, when it came back, was very even. We don't have evidence of a third device. That's not the same as not having one. No, he said. It's not. She thought about the folder in the spare tire well. Her personnel file. Her work schedule was in that file. Carver Ridge Medical. Her unit, her shift rotations. She'd been on a double shift that ended at 5:47 a.m. Her schedule was regular enough that someone who'd been watching for 2 weeks would know which days she worked and which days she drove home on Route 9. They'd know when she'd be on the road. They'd know when she'd stop. Kettner's hadn't been random. It had been placed specifically on her route at a time specifically calibrated to her shift schedule, which meant the selection wasn't about the diner. It was about her. The diner was just the place she'd most likely stop. And someone who thought that way, who'd built a plan with that level of specificity and that level of patience, didn't rely on a single point of failure. "My hospital," she said. "What?" "Carver Ridge Medical. It's on my personnel file. He knows where I work. He knows my schedule." She kept her voice controlled. "What's the patient census at Carver Ridge today?" "I don't—" "Maya, it's a trauma center, mid-sized. Day shift runs high census on Tuesdays. It's a documented pattern for regional hospitals. The data is accessible." She was already moving toward Trevor, who was 20 feet away coordinating the market scene. "If a third device exists and the target is designed around me specifically, it's not a random location. It's somewhere I have connection to. It's my hospital." She heard Trent start talking to someone on a secondary line. She reached Trevor. "Carver Ridge Medical. We need EOD there now." Trevor looked at her. He'd known her for 5 hours, and he'd developed the particular expression of someone who has learned to take her seriously. "On what basis?" "Pattern evidence and behavioral profile." She kept it tight. "If I'm wrong, it's a precautionary sweep that turns up nothing. If I'm right—" He was already on his radio. She couldn't go to Carver Ridge. Trent had been explicit about that. She was a material witness in an active federal investigation. She had not slept, and she had no law enforcement authority inside a hospital she worked at, which would create a conflict that could compromise the scene if anything was found. She understood all of that. She still had to work very hard not to get in her truck and drive. Raven seemed to understand something was wrong. The dog stayed pressed against her leg for the next 40 minutes in a way she didn't usually do outside of working conditions. The full weight of her side against Maya's calf, steady and warm and present. Maya sat on the tailgate again because there was nothing else to do, and her legs were past the point of standing for extended periods, and the folding chair had been someone else's to take. At 12:47, Trent came to the truck. She knew from his face before he spoke. "EOD found something," he said. "Carver Ridge Medical. Loading dock, south entrance. Commercial waste container, same placement profile as Kettner's." He stopped. "Same construction. Same timer design." He paused. It was on a longer delay. "Tonight. Evening shift change." Maya looked at him. "How many staff and patients on evening shift change?" he asked. "Shift change is the highest density hour. Staff overlap is full coverage, both shifts in the building simultaneously. Patient load doesn't reduce during transition." She stopped. 200, minimum. Some of them can't be moved. ICU, post-surgical, NICU. Trent's jaw was tight. "It's been neutralized," he said. "EOD has it. It's safe." She nodded. The information moved through her in a strange way. The relief and the shape of what it would have been existing at the same time, side by side. "How long had it been in place?" she asked. "Placed within the last 48 hours, based on the timer setting." He looked at her. "While Darrow was still free, before this morning." "It was already there when he smiled," she said. Trent was quiet. He knew it was there. He knew we'd find him at the market, or he was prepared for it. He didn't need to not be arrested. She looked at her hands. He needed the arrest to happen so the response would focus on him, so the investigation would concentrate here, so no one was looking at Carver Ridge until it was too late. "He miscalculated," Trent said. "You made the connection before evening." "I got lucky," she said. "I had the right information at the right time." "You've been saying that all day." "Because it's true." She looked at him. "Where's Vale?" "Still in the mobile unit. Counsel is present now. Interview is ongoing." He paused. The Carver Ridge device changes his exposure significantly, providing building access to facilitate a device that was part of a 3-device series, federal conspiracy charges, minimum. His counsel knows that. "Is he talking?" "He will be." Trent's voice had a flat certainty. "People talk when they understand what they're actually connected to." Maya thought about Darren Vale. The man who'd stood in his own diner with his arms crossed and his name tag, and his absolute certainty that the rules of his establishment superseded everything else. The man who'd called the police instead of reading the documentation she'd put on the table. Who'd followed her into the service corridor still arguing after she'd identified a threat. She'd given him too much generosity at the time. She'd told Sims he wasn't malicious. She'd given him the reasonable interpretation. He'd been managing the scene. He'd let her in, and then tried to get her out, and when it hadn't worked, He'd done exactly what someone does when a plan starts to unravel. He'd escalated his own position, gotten louder, made himself more visible, because visibility, if you were the building owner, was its own kind of cover. The bandage on Darrow's arm, she said. The field wrap. We're having it assessed. It's a burn. Partial thickness, probably from a component failure during assembly. She looked at Trent. He built all three himself. There was an accident during one of the assemblies. He wrapped it himself because going to a medical facility created a record. She paused. If you pull urgent care and ER records for walk-in burn injuries in the past 6 weeks, in the county where the Draper County device was found, we can build the travel timeline, Trent said, and establish where he was and when, which establishes the planning sequence, which establishes premeditation that goes well beyond what the arrest this morning can document alone. She stopped. Chain the evidence before his counsel starts controlling the narrative. Trent looked at her for a moment. You've done this before. Evidence management? No. But I've been in enough debrief environments to understand how the sequence of information shapes what the sequence of consequences looks like. She held his gaze. He planned this for months. The arrest has to be the beginning of what happens to him, not the end. He nodded slowly, turned and gave instructions to one of his agents. The agent moved off immediately. It was 1:15 in the afternoon. Maya had been awake for 29 hours. Raven was lying flat on the tailgate beside her, legs extended, chin on the metal, doing what she sometimes did after a long operation. The particular deep rest of an animal who had done the work she was built to do and had arrived at the end of it. Her breathing was slow and even. Her paws twitched once, the way a working dog's paws sometimes did when their body was resting and their mind was still moving through something. Maya put her hand on the dog's side, felt the ribs rise and fall. She should sleep. She knew that. The adrenaline that had been her primary fuel for the past 9 hours was going to stop working, and when it did, it would go fast, and she'd rather be horizontal when it happened. Trevor had offered the back seat of his car twice. She'd declined twice. She wasn't ready to stop watching. Not yet. Not while the shape of this thing was still resolving. At 1:43, one of Trent's agents came out of the mobile interview unit and spoke to him at length. Trent listened, asked 2 questions, listened again. Then he walked to Maya. Vale is talking, he said. What is he saying? Enough. He stopped. He says he met Darrow 11 months ago, online community. He won't specify which one yet. Says Darrow presented himself as a security researcher, said he was documenting vulnerabilities in public spaces for a consulting firm. Told Vale he'd pay him a consulting fee if he could provide access details on his building. And Vale believed that. Vale says he believed it. He says he didn't know what Darrow was going to do with the access. Trent's expression was carefully neutral. His counsel is framing it as a negligent facilitation rather than knowing participation. The interior footage shows him entering the corridor at 2:47 a.m., Maya said. Yes. Why was he there? Trent looked at her steadily. He says Darrow told him to make sure the corridor door was propped, that there was a monitoring device he needed ventilation access for. And he propped a door in his own building at 3 in the morning and didn't ask more questions than that. His counsel says the communication was ambiguous, that Vale had no specific knowledge. He tried to remove me from the building while the device was running, Maya said. That's not ambiguity, that's consciousness of guilt. Yes. Trent's voice was flat. The federal prosecutors will make that argument. He paused. He's also given us something on Darrow. A name. Not the one in the vehicle. An online handle, a platform, a communication history he kept. His counsel convinced him that cooperation was the only variable he controlled at this point. What's the name? We're running it. He looked at her. But there's something else, he said, something about Darrow's stated purpose, the reason Darrow gave him for the devices. Maya waited. He told Vale he was building a case, Trent said, for something he called a proof of concept. He said the devices weren't the point, the response was. He was documenting detection failure rates. He said, Trent stopped, choosing the words. He said the goal was to demonstrate that the detection system that found the third device was the only reliable one available. The morning came back to her. The diner. Raven sitting down in front of a trash container. 31 people who'd ordered breakfast. He was building a portfolio, Maya said slowly, to sell. Trent looked at her. Detection system documentation. Proof of concept that an MWD human team can find what other systems miss. Evidence of the gap. She stopped. He wasn't a terrorist, he was an arms dealer. He was building the sales material. That's the read, yes. Trent's voice was very quiet. And the buyer, based on what we've been able to pull from the encrypted sections of the phone, the buyer wasn't domestic. The afternoon light was completely still, no wind. The market canopies hung flat. The scheduled delivery was this week, Trent said. The Carver Ridge device was the final proof of concept. After that, he had a handoff meeting set. Where? He looked at her for a long moment, making a decision. That's what the phone team is pulling now, he said. We have a location and a time in approximately, he checked his watch, 14 hours. Maya looked at Raven, still breathing slow and steady on the tailgate. 14 hours. She thought about what Trent had said, that she was a material witness, that she had no law enforcement authority, that there were boundaries he wasn't crossing. She thought about the smile, the handoff meeting, 14 hours. A buyer who wasn't domestic and who was expecting a delivery of documented proof that a specific detection system, one involving a retired military working dog and a former combat medic with a trauma nursing background, was the only reliable tool available. She thought about what it meant to be the person that documentation was about. And she thought about something she hadn't said to Trent yet, something she'd noticed in the parking lot when Darrow was being put on the ground, the bandage on his right forearm, the field wrap, partial thickness burns from component failure. She was a trauma nurse. She'd assessed burns for 22 hours before she'd ever walked into Kettner's this morning. The wrap on Darrow's arm was right-handed work, clean, practiced, self-applied. But it was on his right arm, which meant either he was ambidextrous enough to wrap his dominant hand's injury with his non-dominant hand, possible, difficult, or someone had helped him, someone who knew how to wrap a burn correctly, not a medical professional, but someone trained, someone who'd been in enough field environments to know the technique. She pressed her earpiece. Trent, the second name Vale gave you, the online handle. We're running it. Check the service records database. Military medical background, burn treatment training, field medicine. She stopped. And check the Fort Driscoll MWD program records. Silence. Specifically, she said, check whether anyone else ran an adoption inquiry on Raven before I did. The line stayed quiet for 4 seconds. Then Trent said, in a voice that had gone very controlled, why? Because someone who wanted documentation of an MWD handler detection team wouldn't just track the team from the outside, Maya said. They'd want to understand the team from the inside. She kept her voice steady. And Raven had a previous handler, and that handler had a service record, and that record was in the same database as mine. The line was quiet. Someone researched Aaron Briggs, she said, which means someone may have known him or known someone who knew him. She paused. Trent, who submitted the adoption inquiry that came before mine? In the mobile interview unit 30 feet away, she could hear faintly the sound of a chair moving. Then Trent's voice, very carefully. The prior inquiry was withdrawn, filed and withdrawn 8 months before your application. No name was retained in the active record. He paused. But the file processor would have the original submission. Call them, Maya said. Another pause. Maya. His voice had changed slightly, a weight in it that hadn't been there before. Before I do that, is there anyone in your life, your current life since separation, who knew about Raven before you adopted her? Who you might have told about the process? She thought about it. Her charge supervisor at Carver Ridge, a neighbor, a few people from her unit who she still kept loose contact with, and one person who'd asked specifically about Raven 2 months after Aaron died, before Maya had filed the adoption inquiry, before the paperwork had even begun. Who'd asked about the dog in the particular way of someone checking whether an option was still available. She'd thought at the time that it was grief, that the person was asking because they'd loved Aaron and they wanted to know the dog was going to be cared for. She hadn't thought about it since. Maya, Trent said. Who knew? She told him the name, and in the mobile interview unit, through the thin metal wall, she heard Darren Vale's voice rise suddenly. Not in argument, but in the particular surprised pitch of a man who has just been shown something he didn't expect. A photograph, probably. Or a name. The connection she'd just handed Trent had just walked through a door on the other side of the investigation, and wherever it came out was going to change the shape of everything that had happened today in a way she was only beginning to understand. The name she'd given Trent was Specialist Drew Callum. She hadn't spoken it aloud in 14 months. Not because she'd been avoiding it, more that the person it belonged to had faded into the particular background noise of post-separation life, the contacts that don't disappear so much as drift, the relationships that were built around a shared context that no longer exists. Drew had served in the same battalion during Maya's second deployment. Not attached to her unit, but adjacent, logistics and supply chain, which meant he moved through the same operating bases, attended the same briefings, knew the same names. He'd known Aaron. That was the connection she'd filed under grief and left there. She sat with Raven on the tailgate and listened to the investigation move faster around her in the next 20 minutes than it had all day. She could track it in fragments through the earpiece, Trent's voice cutting between frequencies, his agents relaying, the tempo of the command post changing into something more urgent. Drew Callum's service record. Drew Callum's separation date, which had come 9 months before hers, a general discharge that she now understood meant something she hadn't thought to ask about at the time. Drew Callum's current address, which the database returned as a location in Harwick County, the same county as the UPS store shell company, the same county as the storage unit. She pressed her earpiece. Trent. I know, he said. He was at Fort Driscoll's MWD program before I filed my adoption application, she said. He had months of access to the program records. He could have built a profile on Raven's history before I was even in the picture. We're pulling the Fort Driscoll access logs now. A pause. Maya, I need you to listen to me about something. She waited. Drew Callum's vehicle was flagged on a traffic camera at 7:42 this morning, heading east on Route 9. He let that sit. That's the opposite direction from Kettner's. We didn't flag it in the initial sweep because it wasn't the vehicle of interest. Another pause. But east on Route 9, at that speed, puts him at Carver Ridge Medical in approximately 17 minutes. The loading dock, the waste container, the evening shift change. Drew hadn't been the architect. He'd been the third piece, the person with insider knowledge of the MWD program, the person who could confirm Raven's specific training profile for Darrow's documentation, the person who could access a hospital where Maya worked because she'd given him her work address during one of their last loose contact exchanges 14 months ago. She'd told him where she worked. She'd mentioned Carver Ridge in passing, the way you mention your job to someone you used to know. She sat with that for a moment. The specific discomfort of it. Not guilt, but its first cousin. The thing that happens when you understand that your ordinary life was being mapped by someone you thought was peripheral. Where is he now? Now? She asked. That's what we're working on. Trent's voice was controlled. The handoff meeting, the location the phone team pulled. It's in Harwick County, Warehouse District, East End, and Drew Callum's last known address is 4 miles from that location. She looked at Raven. The dog had her eyes open now, tracking the activity of the lot without lifting her head. Alert, but not urgent. Processing. The handoff is in 14 hours, Trent said. We have a location. We have a buyer profile from the phone. We're going to be ready for it. He paused. Callum doesn't know Darrow has been taken. If he doesn't have communication from Darrow in the next few hours, he may reach out, or he may run. He'll reach out first, Maya said. He's been in this too deep and too long to run without knowing for certain the operation is blown. He'll try to contact Darrow. Which gives us a window. Yes. I want you to know, Trent said, that your read on this, all of it, from Raven's indication this morning to the burn wrap to the adoption inquiry, built the case that makes the next 14 hours possible. He stopped, and when he continued, his voice was careful and direct. I want you to hear that clearly, not as a courtesy, as an accurate statement of what happened today. She didn't respond for a moment. Find Callum, she said, before he runs. They found Drew Callum at 6:12 that evening, at a gas station 4 miles from the Harwick County Warehouse District, fueling a truck that had been registered under his sister's name and contained, in a locked toolbox in the bed, a hard drive with encrypted files that the federal technical team would later describe as the most comprehensive MWD handler documentation package they had ever encountered. He did not smile when they arrested him. He looked, according to Trevor, who was part of the takedown team, like a man who had run the numbers and finally arrived at an answer he'd been hoping was wrong. He was cooperative in the immediate sense, no resistance, no incident. And then his counsel arrived and he stopped cooperating, which was his right, and which no longer mattered because the hard drive and the phone data and Darren Vale's cooperation agreement and the Fort Driscoll access logs had already built the foundation of a case that didn't require his participation. Darrow, whose real name turned out to be James Coulter Reed, formerly of a private security consulting firm that had lost its federal contracts 2 years prior under circumstances that were now making considerably more sense, had a bail hearing 4 days later that the federal prosecutors opposed on flight risk grounds and won. He was remanded pending trial on charges that included domestic terrorism facilitation, conspiracy, illegal arms information trafficking, and 3 counts of placing explosive devices in public spaces. His counsel's argument that the devices were never intended to detonate, that they were constructed specifically to be found, had the logical problem that intent doesn't immunize outcome, and that 2 of the 3 had been found only because a retired military dog and her handler had been in the right place at the right time. Darren Vale's cooperation agreement resulted in a plea to 1 count of federal conspiracy facilitation. He lost the diner, not to the law directly, but because the story of what he'd done became public within 48 hours of his arrest, and the community of Dunmore, Tennessee, made its own determination. The Kettner sign came down 6 weeks later. The building sat empty for a while after that. Maya drove past it once and didn't stop. Drew Callum went to trial 8 months later. The hard drive alone was enough. The prosecutors also presented the Fort Driscoll access logs, the traffic camera footage, the chemical residue from the Carver Ridge loading dock that matched compounds found in his storage unit, and a series of encrypted messages between him and Reed that laid out the documentation project in enough detail that the jury was out for less than a day. He received 12 years. Reed received 23. Maya wasn't in the courtroom for either verdict. She was at Carver Ridge, in Scrubs, managing a trauma bay that had 3 simultaneous cases and a student nurse who was doing everything right but had gone pale in a way that meant she was about 30 seconds from either finding her footing or sitting down on the floor. Maya put her hand briefly on the student's shoulder. Not a pause, not a speech, just a moment of contact that said, "I see you, stay with it," and the student stayed with it. She heard about the verdicts from Trevor, who texted her both times. She texted back thank you and meant it, and then went back to work. The thing that people wanted from Maya in the months that followed was a version of the story that had a cleaner shape than the one she had. They wanted her to say that she'd known, walking into Kettner's that morning, that something was wrong, that some instinct had guided her to stop at that specific diner on that specific morning, that it was the kind of story where the right person ends up in the right place because the universe has that kind of architecture. She couldn't give them that version because it wasn't true. She'd stopped because she was tired and hungry, and Raven had shifted in the back seat. That was the complete and honest account of why 31 people ate breakfast that morning instead of something else entirely. Not instinct, not destiny. Exhaustion and a dog who moved at the right moment. What she could tell them, what she did tell them in the written statement she provided to the federal investigators, in the conversation she had with a TBI agent named Dara Sims over coffee 3 months after the arrests, in the single interview she gave to a journalist who had been specifically recommended by Trent as someone who would report it accurately, was what had actually happened. A woman who had been trained to trust specific signals had trusted a specific signal. A dog who had never false indicated in 6 years of service had done her job in a diner in Dunmore, Tennessee, and then done it again 40 minutes later in a farmer's market parking lot. And the people who had tried to remove them from the room had been wrong. That was the shape of it. Not mythological, not smooth, just the specific, imperfect, consequential truth of what happens when you stay in the room when someone tells you to leave. Sims had looked at her across the coffee shop table and said, "You know, most people would have left." "I know," Maya said. "The documentation, the certification, the whole argument. Most people, even with all that, they get worn down. They leave." Sims held her coffee. "Why didn't you?" Maya thought about it. "I wasn't going to let him decide what Raven was worth," she said. "She'd earned more than that." Sims looked at her. "Just the dog?" Maya was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. Not just the dog. Trevor came to find her at Carver Ridge on a Thursday afternoon in November, 4 months after the arrest. He was off duty, in civilian clothes, and he brought coffee from the place across the street that she'd mentioned once in passing, which told her he'd remembered, and which told her something about the kind of person he was. They sat in the staff lounge, which smelled like old microwave meals and someone's birthday cake from the day before, and he told her that the department had submitted a formal commendation for her actions on that Tuesday morning in August, that it had been reviewed and approved at the state level and would be presented at a ceremony in December if she was willing to attend. She said she'd think about it. He looked at her. He'd gotten better at reading her over the past 4 months. They'd stayed in loose contact the way people do when they've been through something together that doesn't have a clean civilian equivalent. What's the hesitation? I don't know what to do with a ceremony, she said. I know what to do in a diner, apparently, but ceremonies are different. He smiled. Raven gets one too. A separate commendation. Fort Driscoll is issuing it. Maya looked at the table. Something moved in her chest that wasn't entirely comfortable and wasn't entirely unwelcome. She'll hate the ceremony. Probably. He paused. Come anyway. She went. The ceremony was in the Dunmore County Civic Hall on a cold December morning, and it was smaller than she'd expected, which she appreciated. Trent was there, in a suit that looked like it had been purchased specifically for the occasion and fitted by someone with more optimism than accuracy. Dara Sims, several people from the Fort Driscoll MWD program, including the administrator who had processed Raven's adoption 3 years prior and who shook Maya's hand with both of his and didn't say anything for a moment. The state commendation was read aloud. Maya stood straight and listened, and her face did something she couldn't entirely control when they got to the part about Raven, a formal recognition of the retired military working dogs detection work, which was added as an official addendum to Raven's service record. 6 years of active service, deployment in 2 theaters, retirement with medical distinction, and now this. Raven sat at Maya's heel throughout, entirely unbothered by the room, ears moving its sounds, nose doing its quiet and perpetual work of sorting the world. Trevor stood in the back. He caught her eye at one point and she gave him a nod that meant something she didn't have different words for. He nodded back. She didn't cry. She'd processed most of this on her own time, in the weeks after the arrests, during the long drives home from shifts, and the mornings when she took Raven out early and they walked the route behind her house where the light came over the tree line at an angle that made everything look briefly clarified. She'd processed what it meant to have been seen and still dismissed, what it meant to have been right, what it costs to hold your position when every social pressure in the room is pushing you toward the door, and what it's worth, the specific, uncashable, permanent worth of not moving. She'd also processed, on those same mornings, what it meant to have been tracked, to have had her ordinary life mapped by someone she'd trusted peripherally and paid too little attention to. That one sat differently. It didn't diminish the outcome, but it added a texture to it that wasn't comfortable. The reminder that being right doesn't protect you from having been vulnerable, that the same openness that lets you live in the world also lets the world in. She'd decided she could hold both things, right and vulnerable, vindicated and aware. It didn't have to resolve into something neater than that. After the ceremony, there was coffee and the kind of food that appears at institutional gatherings without anyone having specifically ordered it, and people came to talk to her in the particular way that people approach someone they've read about, a little uncertain, a little overprepared. She was patient with it. She understood that for most of them, the story was the event. For her, the event was just a Tuesday. A woman stopped in front of her, mid-40s, work clothes, the specific face of someone who has been carrying something for a few months and isn't sure how to put it down. She introduced herself as a vendor from the Millhaven Farmers Market, the produce table, the one whose canopy had gone over when Red Sedan came through. I didn't understand what was happening, the woman said. That morning, people were running and I grabbed my cash box and I left. She stopped. I went home and turned on the news and I still didn't understand for about an hour. Maya waited. I just wanted to say thank you. The woman's voice was careful around the edges, the way voices get when the thing underneath them is larger than the words being used. My daughter was with me that morning. She's 7. I had her behind the table helping me bag things. She stopped again. Thank you. Maya looked at her. She thought about what to say that was true and also adequate, and there was no version of that. So she said the thing that was at least true. Your daughter did the right thing, she said. She stayed with you and she left when you left. That's exactly right. She paused. That's all any of us can do. Stay when staying is right. Leave when leaving is right. Know the difference. The woman nodded. She seemed to want to say more and then decided she'd said what she came to say, and she moved off, and Maya turned back to the room. Raven had found a patch of winter light coming through the hall windows and was lying in it with her eyes half closed, the dignified repose of a working animal who has attended enough formal occasions to understand they don't require participation. Maya looked at her, the bad leg, the graying muzzle, the 7 years of a life built around finding things that shouldn't be there and sitting down when she found them. No ceremony had ever been necessary for Raven to know what she was worth. She'd always known. She just kept working. Maya had learned a lot from that. She walked over and sat on the floor beside her dog, which was not the kind of thing one typically did at a civic commendation ceremony, and she didn't particularly care. Raven's head came up and turned toward her, and she put her hand on the dog's neck. Good work, she said quietly. You did real good. Raven leaned into her palm. Outside the hall windows, the December light was doing the thing winter light does in Tennessee, arriving low and honest, without the softening haze of other seasons, just the clear, cold fact of illumination. Maya looked at it and thought about the Tuesday morning that had started with bad shoes and a 22-hour shift and an empty coffee cup, and had ended with something she still didn't have the right word for. Not triumph, that was too clean. Not survival, that was too narrow. Something in between. Something that had to do with not moving when everything in the room told you to move. With trusting the signals you'd earned the right to trust. With knowing that the people who told you what you were worth had no authority over what you were actually worth, and that the gap between those two things was where every important thing happened. She wasn't the same person who'd walked into Kettner's diner. She wasn't sure she'd want to be. That person had been right about everything and still almost lost the room. This version of her knew something additional, that being right isn't enough, that the right has to be held and defended and sometimes argued for in a service corridor with a manager who isn't listening and a deputy who is still deciding and 31 people in the next room who don't know they're depending on you. You don't get to know, most mornings, whether the thing you're doing matters. You just do the thing that's in front of you, and you trust what you know, and you don't let the room decide what you are. And sometimes, on the worst kind of Tuesday, in the kind of diner that has a sign with a missing letter and a $4 special, and a manager who has already decided what you are before you open your mouth, sometimes you stay. And everything else follows from that.